Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Kyle Queers. I am the Director of Operations for the Kaufman Interfaith Institute here at Grand Valley State University. And on behalf of the Kaufman Institute, I would like to welcome all of you, as well as our dear friends from the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies at University of Michigan, here to our city campus. The Kaufman Interfaith Institute seeks to advance equity and belonging for persons of all religious, secular, and spiritual identities through human connection, interfaith understanding, and collective transformation, both in the wider community and here on campus. Tonight, we are pleased to host the 6th annual Padnos Public Engagement Lecture on Jewish Learning, featuring our dear friends Dr. Mustafa Hussein and Dr. Eric Covey from University of Michigan and Grand Valley State University, respectively. So at this time, I would like to introduce the interim director of Frankel Center, Deborah Dash Moore, who is the Jonathan Friedman Distinguished University Professor of History and Professor of Judaic Studies. Welcome, so glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And it's lovely to welcome all of you to what I think you will find to be a very interesting conversation. I have great pleasure to introduce our two conversation partners for this evening's discussion. Each one brings a rich background, and I think you'll hear some differing perspectives. I'm pleased to acknowledge also the valuable support from the Stuart and Barbara Padnos Foundation. The Padnos Public Engagement Lecture was made possible by a gift from the Stuart and Barbara Padnos Foundation, represented by three brothers, Doug, Daniel, and Jeff Padnos, and their families. And it's great that Jeff is here today. So let me start with you, Mustafa, my colleague. He is an assistant professor in the Judaic Studies Department at the University of Michigan. He is a historian specializing in modern Israel-Palestine and neighboring Arabic-speaking countries in the Middle East, basically in the years from the 19th through to the 21st centuries, with a focus on Jewish Arab-Muslim studies. He teaches on the multifaceted relations, religious, cultural, intellectual, and social, between Jews and Arab Muslims from medieval to modern times. A central aim of his research is to illuminate how Arab and Jewish scholars in the modern Middle East have reappropriated and repurposed their communities' shared histories and interwoven legacies. So he has a forthcoming book, like a month or so away. It's called Hebrew Orientalism, Jewish Engagement with Arabo-Islamic Culture in Late Ottoman and British Palestine. And the book provides a nuanced understanding of Hebrew Orientalism by focusing on the practical activities of Hebrew writers, things like recuperating the Jewish past in the East, or constructing Jewish indigeneity, consolidating Jewish ties to Palestine's landscape, enhancing understanding of the Hebrew Bible, reviving the Hebrew language, and undertaking translation projects. He also shifts the focus and looks at various perceptions of Jews in Arabic-speaking countries in the Middle East, in the same time period, and recently has published a new book titled Remembering Jews in Maghrebi and Middle Eastern Media. His partner in conversation, Eric Covey, is a faculty member here at the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, Brooks College, Grand Valley State University, where he teaches courses on global, integrative, and women, gender, and sexuality studies. He received his PhD from the University of Texas in Austin and is the author of Americans at War in the Ottoman Empire, U.S. Mercenary Force in the Middle East. So mercenaries are often treated as historical footnotes, yet their encounters with the Ottoman world contributed in unexpected ways to U.S. culture, and the impressions that they left behind continue to influence U.S. approaches to Africa and the Middle East. By focusing on these mercenary encounters through the lenses of memory, sovereignty, literature, geography, and diplomacy, Americans at War in the Ottoman Empire reveals the ways in which mercenary force, while marginal in terms of frequency and scope, produced important knowledge about the Ottoman world and helped to establish the complicated relationship of intimacy and mastery that exists between Americans in the United States and people in such countries as Egypt, Libya, Sudan, Uganda, South Sudan, and Turkey. I should also note that back in 2018-19, Dr. Covey was a Fulbright scholar to Nigeria, teaching history and diplomatic studies at the University of Abuja, okay, while doing research for a future book on Nigerian literature, politics, and international law. Okay, take it away.
So let's start this way. I was really, really thrilled to be invited to be part of this, not least of which so I could review and read your book before it comes out on December 9th. Keep that on your calendars because it is a really kind of interesting, meticulously researched and of course translated as well effort that I think contributes to an important body of knowledge. So in my classroom with my students, and I think in the world at large, I frequently encounter two kinds of discourses about kind of historical Palestine in the late 19th, early 20th century. The first of these is a kind of typical discourse, East is East and West is West. And typically what that means is that the kind of Judeo-Christian world or history is separate from the kind of Arabo-Islamic or otherwise world. And then the second kind of idea I encounter oftentimes, again, in the classroom or at the world at large, is this idea that, quote, these people have always been fighting over there. The idea that the Middle East is this kind of place of constant conflict that's never ending, that's perhaps biblical or kind of racial, religious, some kind of long-standing kind of blood feud, perhaps. And in fact, I had a student writing a paper this semester, and early on in the paper, they began to describe the kind of long history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I was concerned that they were going to essentially imagine this thing was 1,000 years. But later in the paper, they recognized that this was about 100 years. But nevertheless, the students saw for this conflict no foreseeable kind of solution or end in sight. And I think any kind of solution that lacks the kind of historical depth or context is also one that is likely bound to fail. The truth, of course, is that Jews, Christians, and Muslims have a long, intimate, and entangled history in the Middle East. And so I think this book contributes to laying that out. I'm thinking here specifically of books like Zachary Lockman, Comrades and Enemies, where he talks about kind of Arab Jews and Muslims under the kind of British mandate. Julia Phillips Cohen's book, Becoming Ottomans, and then Daphne Hirsch's work on foodways as a kind of site of contact and intimacy in the Middle East. So thank you for contributing to this. And I think maybe the place we can begin today is to think about the title of the book. I think there is a kind of visceral reaction to the kind of term Orientalism, which is often associated with the work of Edward Said. But in terms of the title of your book, what exactly do you mean by Hebrew Orientalism?
Thank you so much, Eric, for this for accepting to read the book before it's being published. It's actually a very exciting thing for me to have the opportunity to talk about the book before it is published. I received an invitation a few weeks ago from a scholar who is also administering a podcast. It's called Jerusalem Matters or something. And when he learned about the book, he wanted to interview me and talk about it. But I said, no, I will talk about it first here at GV and giving you exclusive before doing the interviews. Like for me, it's like a warm up to talk about the book in front of a esteemed audience as you, and to see how things go from there. Hebrew Orientalism, I try to shy away from this term in the title of the book, but my editor thought the title actually, this is very provocative and we should choose it for the title of the book. The word Orientalism has different connotations. The first one is that it has, Orient and ism. Orient refers to the East, and it means the study or being an expert in things Oriental. And those who were experts of the Orient are not the Orientals themselves, but those who are outsiders. And those were Orientalists. The Orientalists were Western scholars who want to study scientifically the Orient. It started first as a scholarly endeavor in late 18th century when Napoleon Bonaparte brought with him to Egypt a group of artists and scholars to portray Egypt and write about the customs and about the manners of Egyptians during his campaign, Eastern campaign. That led to the project was actually multiple year project. It took about maybe 10 years, and that led to the publication of a gigantic book called The Description of Egypt. And that book was very, very instrumental in shaping the Western mind of the East and the customs and the manners of the people of the East. So another dimension to in addition to it being, or it claims to be a scientific study of the East, it is in fact, critically speaking, when you look at it, it's a projection of the East. It's a representation of the East in the eyes of the Westerner or the Orientalist. The Orientalist, as an outsider, claims that he is the only one who makes the Orient speak. The Orient cannot speak by itself. It's a representation of the Orient. And in this representation, the Orientalist injects their ideological considerations, their objectives, their perspective of the Orient, rather than producing an objective study of the Orient per se. And that's the critical definition of what Orientalism is, provided by postmodern scholars like Edward Said when he published his book on Orientalism in 1970s. So where is Hebrew now? So the Orientalism, it's a Western study of the Orient, and I will come maybe to this later. Orientalism is studied let's say, two subjects, the Oriental from within and the Oriental from outside. And the Oriental from within was a Jew. The Jews of Europe, they were subject of Orientalism. And the Oriental outside of Europe was also subject of Orientalism. So what if the Oriental from within, the Western Oriental from within, that is a Jew, when it goes to the Orient to establish itself over there, how do they relate to other Oriental population? And here comes Hebrew Orientalism. By Hebrew Orientalism, then, I mean this scholarship produced by Hebrew authors and scholars in late Ottoman and British Palestine on the Palestinian culture, on the land, on the geography and the botany, on the language, on the folkloric materials, and for the way of living, producing some ethnographic and anthropological studies on the indigenous population. So I look then at the ideological underpinnings of the study of the Oriental, and this Oriental is the people, the indigenous population who lived in Palestine, and what were the ideological considerations these Hebrew scholars or writers injected in the representation of the Orient.
Great, thank you. Can you maybe say a few more words about how Hebrew Orientalism, or kind of the intellectual thought of Jews living in late Ottoman Palestine differed from that kind of Western or Romantic Orientalism that most people are kind of more familiar with?
Yes. Um, so for those who were engaged in the production and the dissemination of knowledge about Arabic and Islamic culture, some of them were a native Palestinian Jew, and some of them were Jewish settlers, Jewish immigrants, Jews who came mainly from Eastern Europe because of the anti-Semitism and because of the pogroms. They were looking for places to come and live in. Some came to America, others went different places, and there were, excuse me, and there were Jews who decided to come and live in late Ottoman Palestine. Those were motivated by the idea of Zionism. So Zionism was there were when it was when it came into existence, it came with different shapes and forms. What the earliest form of it was the practical Zionists, and those practical Zionists the movement started with the movement of 40 Russian Jewish students from Russia who decided to pack and leave and go to settle in late Ottoman Palestine. Those were ignorant of the language of the lingua franca, the language that the people used, they spoke, was a Palestinian Arabic. And even in that Palestinian Arabic, for those Jews who lived in late Ottoman Palestine, they also integrated some Yiddish words in that Palestinian dialect, and there is even actually a big book was written, I think maybe published 1960s, called Palestinian Yiddish. It's a Palestinian dialect that the Jews in Palestine spoke, which was like included a Yiddish language and also Arabic language. It's a mishmash, to use also a Yiddish word, mishmash of Yiddish and Palestinian Arabic. So there are native Jews, some of them, they were Ottoman Jews, who in embracing the Zionist idea thought that they could straddle between their Ottomanism and between Zionism as a political cultural movement, not political. It was a cultural movement. They did not see it as a political movement back then, 1880s, that would encourage territorial separation for the Ottoman Empire. And those produced works to Hebrew reading audience, seeing Hebrew as a unifying factor, a linguistic force that could unify or unite Ottoman Jews who spoke several languages. Some of them spoke Arabic, others spoke Ladino, and others spoke Yiddish. So they thought that by uniting them around Hebrew language, they will be able to constitute, to unite Jewish communities and be strong in Ottomania. That's the Ottoman homeland. So this is one. The other Jewish settlers came from Eastern Europe. They also sought to be part of the Ottoman Empire and not necessarily to seek territorial separation from the Ottoman homeland.
So it strikes me that this kind of complex social, cultural, linguistic picture that you're describing of the Levant here in the late Ottoman period, it makes me think of the cover for the book, which is, I believe, the Haifa Gate.
Yeah.
So this, thinking of this kind of dynamic world, in the first half of that book, you place the relations among Arab Jews, Christians, and Muslims in what Usama Makdisi describes as the ecumenical frame. Can you tell us what that means in practical terms?
Yes, I wish we had a picture of the cover of the book to talk more about it, which is quite captivating, and it summarizes the idea of the book in a way. So Osama Makdisi is an Ottomanist, like scholar of Ottoman history. He uses this term ecumenical framework. The term ecumenical from Christian history means the Christian world. In another in 17th century, that term acquired another connotation to refer to the worldwide or the universe in general. He claims that in the late Ottoman period, especially after the reforms that were introduced in 1850s, before 1850s, Ottoman Empire was or granted semi-autonomy to religious communities, like Jewish communities, Christian communities. There is only one Christian community in the Ottoman Empire. We talk about the Armenians, we talk about the Greek, we talk about the Chaldeans, we talk about the Maronites. There were many Christian communities in the Ottoman Empire, many languages spoken under one empire, whereas at the time, the America was a monolingual empire. It was one language, mostly one religion, Christianity. England also, one language, almost one religion. But the Ottoman Empire was very, very diverse linguistically and religiously, as well as ethnically. So remember, and because of this diversity, it was hospitable to accommodate other immigrants who would like to come and settle in and to be part of the Ottoman Empire. So he claims that after 1850s, after the crumbling of the cultural and religious autonomy of these religious communities and introducing the idea of citizenship to the Ottomans, when Ottomans at the time relied on the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and also relied on the French Constitution to introduce these ideas to centralize the Ottoman Empire and make the Ottoman subjects, not subjects, but transform from being subjects of the Sultan to become citizens. Citoyen, the French word that they used to introduce this idea to Ottoman citizens. So he finds that after 1850s up until World War I, Jewish communities, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities were familiar with their differences, but their familiarity with their differences did not lead to religious extremism. It led to cohabitation. They lived together without necessarily celebrating the diversity or this religious pluralism. Because when you are experiencing a state, you don't necessarily, a state maybe of mind, you don't need necessarily to celebrate it, you just live it. So he claims that they were living this religious pluralism without necessarily celebrating it. And that didn't lead to religious extremism because of their differences. And this religious, ethnic, and linguistic diverse landscape was instrumental for Jewish nationalists to seek Ottoman Empire for a place for them to live, because they could blend in. They could speak Hebrew. They could practice freely the religion. They could be Jews without anybody harassing them or anybody going after them, or committing pogroms like in Eastern Europe. So they found their Ottoman Jewish co-religionists celebrating, for example, 400 years of the expulsion. So there is the Jewish expulsion from southern Spain in 1492, which is today Indigenous Peoples' Day. It used to be Columbus Day, but this 1492 has significance in Jewish history. So that it signals the expulsion of Jews from Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus. And the Ottomans welcomed them and opened the gates for them to settle anywhere they wish. They found, Eastern European Jews or Western Jews found their co-religionists celebrating 400 years of settlement in the Ottoman Empire, whereas French Jews were celebrating only 100 years of the French, the Jewish emancipation in France, or maybe like 50 years here and there. So that signaled that means that Jews and Christians and Muslims were familiar with each other, and they maintained a state of cohabitation, which in the perspective of Osama Maqdisi crumbled only with the British conquest in 1917 and the introduction of the Balfour Declaration.
And I think we'll get an opportunity to talk about that toward the end of the talk tonight, what kind of changes by the end of the first half of your book. So you described the book as, and in fact it is, a little intellectual history, but I am someone who is really kind of interested in biographical history, which is experiencing a kind of renaissance right now. So I very much read a lot of your chapters as kind of biographical histories of a number of really interesting Jewish thinkers. Maybe at this point then we can kind of drill down to a few of these individuals and think about the ways in which they contributed to, I think what you were just talking about, scholars sometimes call Ottoman Zionism. So do you have some people you'd like to talk about?
Yes. So I can think of David Yalin because I use him as a tour guide. So I deal with a number of Jewish intellectuals. Some of them were native Palestinian Jews. Others were immigrants. So David Yalin is very interesting in so many ways. His father, his name is Yehoshua Yalin, and is actually the Hebrew word for Poland is. Does anyone know what is the Hebrew word for Poland? Pauline means here stay. Pauline, here stay. Pauline, Yalin means also to stay, someone who has come to stay. So and in Arabic, Yalin means someone who is flexible. Yalin, someone who is flexible and easygoing. Like, I'm the easygoing David. So this it will be like his when he's written in Arabic, Yalin means the easygoing, the flexible, open-minded David. So his father, Yehoshua Yalin, he is from Poland, and he came to Jerusalem in the mid-19th century. Actually, not him. He was born in Jerusalem. His father came from Poland at the beginning of 19th century, and he didn't live in Poland, actually. In Jerusalem, he lived first in Sfad. He lived in Sfad, and if there is something that we could relate to, we were talking about in our conversation earlier about Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt. So in 1830s, Yehoshua father, this is Yalin's. Oh, I'm sorry. This is somebody else. Forget about this. I'm sorry. But I will come to it. I promise. It's actually a very interesting story about Muhammad Ali and Eliyahu Sapir. So maybe he will come up in the conversation. But David, his father came to Jerusalem from Poland when he was 10 years old. He learned Arabic. He married a woman of an Iraqi Jewish family from the household of Ezekiel Shalom Yehuda. And David grew up straddling both languages. So he learned Arabic, the Iraqi accent, the Iraqi Arabic, and also he knew Yiddish from his father. And he went to the Alliance Israelite Universelle. This is like our Kol Yisrael Haverim. This is like all Israelites are brothers. It's a school that was established mid-19th century with the idea of encouraging Jews to assimilate in their surroundings after what's called the Damascus Affair in 1840. It's a story for another day. So he was a scholar of Hebrew literature, specifically the Hebrew literature of the Jews of medieval Spain. He was an expert of the the Jews of Al-Andalus, of their poetry, and he wrote, published books on the subject, and he taught at the Hebrew University in 1926. He was active on so many levels, as a teacher, as a politician, as an Ottoman citizen, um, in where. So he advocated the idea of the revival of Hebrew, which Eliezer ben Yehuda introduced. Eliezer ben Yehuda is known to be the father of modern language. He's a Russian Jew, immigrated to Palestine in 1881. He attracted other Jewish individuals who also thought that the revival of Hebrew, or the using Hebrew as spoken language outside of the synagogues, would unite the Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire and elsewhere. So he thought that to revive modern Hebrew, or to use it as a spoken language, there is a need to rely on Arabic. Arabic is not is a sister language of Hebrew, is a Semitic language, and because of the fact that Arabic remained alive and practiced and spoken for quite some time, whereas Hebrew went into slumber, we could use Arabic as a way to give it like a boost, to give Hebrew a boost, and then we could avoid gaps in in the language, and we could speak with it fluently. David Yellin also. He was a deputy of the mayor of Jerusalem during the Ottoman period, and he worked very, very actively in the acquisition of lands for the Jewish settlers, and he did not see this. It contradicts his loyalty to the Ottoman Empire and his support to his brothers who were suffering under European persecution. He would, for example, serve as a translator, because the laws of the lands at the time in the Ottoman period were quite complex and complicated. At some point, the Ottomans allowed immigrants to purchase lands, and then when they found out about organized movement to establish Palestine as a national homeland for Jews, they restricted the sale of land. But for the native Palestinian Ottoman citizens, so he, as a native Palestinian Ottoman citizen, he used this privilege to purchase territories, purchase land, and sell them to Jewish settlers to stay there. He also, in addition to that, in his works, he was one of the founders, by the way, of the National Library of Israel. Not the National Library as we know it today, but it was another library. It's called the Midrash of Rabbananel, that was established or founded in 1892, along with other Jewish intellectuals. And he insisted in that library that for Jews to indigenize, to integrate into the culture of the Orient, they needed to learn about the history of Jews in Muslim Spain, in Al-Andalus, and seeing Al-Andalus as a model to be maybe re-imitated in the Ottoman Palestine period. And he insisted on the acquisition of books that talk about the history of Jews in Muslim Spain.
Good. Yeah, I mean, your description of what we can maybe describe as figures who occupy a middle ground, in my own work, when I'm thinking about Americans in the Ottoman Empire and the kind of, again, complex legal system, and also foreign relations of the Ottoman Empire, there are so many of these figures who seem to negotiate or straddle different worlds. And I think Eileen, like you said, is a good tour guide because he is born 1864, but then passes away in 1941, very nearly at the end of your book. So he's throughout both kind of halves. I do, though, want to hear more about Sapir, both the grandfather and the grandson, because I think they're also, in some ways, the two of them are an interesting contrast to Yaleen.
Yes, so unlike Yaleen, who was born to a native, an Iraqi Jew, an Iraqi mother, Eliyahu Sapir, who died in 1911, I think, Eliyahu Sapir was a descendant of Ashkenazi family that settled in Jerusalem, first in Sfad 1830s. And here's a story about his grandfather, Yaakov Sapir. So Yaakov Sapir lived in Sfad, and in 1832, from 1830 to 1840, the Egyptians conquered Palestine, Syria. Muhammad Ali was an expansionist ruler. He had this vision of overthrowing the Supreme Porte, the Ottoman Sultan, and to have a gigantic empire, Egyptian empire, to secure the River Nile from the source to the Mediterranean. So the River Nile starts in Ethiopia and ends in the north in the Mediterranean. So he wanted to conquest all of these territories in addition to Syria and Palestine. So he conquers Palestine and Syria with his son Ibrahim Pasha from 1830s. 1832, there was a revolt, a Palestinian organized by Palestinian farmers who did not like the rule of the Egyptians because to them it was a foreign rule. So they rebelled against the Egyptians, even though they were their kin, they were Muslims, but nevertheless to them they were foreigners, they were outsiders, and they need to go. So they rebelled against Ibrahim Pasha, the older son of Muhammad Ali, and he tried to quell that revolt by force. He bombarded the farmers and the rebels, and that created a security vacuum. During this security vacuum, pundits and people plundered unattended properties, including the properties of Jews who lived in Sfad. One of them was Yaakov Sapir. So Yaakov Sapir fled from his house in Sfad, and the person who actually helped him was a sheikh, a Muslim sheikh, a local Muslim sheikh who hid him for a few days until things settled down, and then he returned. But that story, with the tension aside for a second, talks about this neighborly relationship between people despite their religious differences. And that story remained with Yaakov Sapir, with the family, and that might have inspired him to study more about the history of Jews of Yemen in 19th century. So I'm not sure, Yemen or India, actually I forget. But his grandson, Eliyahu Sapir, learned from his father, or his father for him was an inspiration. So he wanted to learn more about the neighbors, not just remotely through social or economic transactions, but he wanted to learn the language, learn the history, learn the literature. So he went to the Alliance Israélite Universelle because the Alliance introduced Arabic as the language of the dominant language and as a language of assimilation. So he studied Arabic, immersed himself in the history and literature, Arabic literature and Arabic history. And as a teacher, one of the activities he very much was doing was to instill in the minds of the Hebrew students the love for the homeland, but not in Arabic, but in Hebrew. So he taught them how to love the homeland by introducing to them maybe the meanings and the history and the etymology of the flora and fauna in Palestine. But while doing so, he would teach them about the Arabic origins. Without knowing the Arabic origins or the history of the Palestinian fingerprint of this place or that animal, you won't be able to be fully integrated into this landscape. So to be, part and parcel of the landscape, you have to understand its trajectory, where it comes from and where it goes. And he did not see the introduction of Hebrew appellation or nomenclature, the names, Hebrew names, as a way to substitute for Arabic. He insisted on knowing both names. And he also finds it interesting that when we acknowledge the Arabness or the Arabic name of a place or a plant, we will get to appreciate the Bible more, because the Bible mentions these names, these place names, and these plants and these animals. So that will get us closer to learn about the Bible, about the sacred book for Jews.
Yeah, as I was reading about Safir, one of the things that kind of struck me, especially with map making, I was thinking of John Smith. So in 1616, John Smith, an English explorer in the Americas, he writes this book that includes a map of what is for the first time called New England, and it circulates in England, and eventually it encourages the kind of pilgrims and the Puritans to come to the Americas. But in his book, and in this kind of map that John Smith creates, the land is kind of divorced. There's no kind of native presence on the land. Everything is, of course, in English. It is also portrayed as a kind of like land of milk and honey, which gets the pilgrims into trouble because they arrive totally unprepared to survive in this environment in the 17th century. So I'm wondering, if you can say kind of more about the role of the landscape, the role of creating maps. And again, I think thinking about the interplay between Arabic and kind of Hebrew in this moment.
Yes. So for the individuals that I study in the book, to them, Palestine is not a land without people. It's a land that has people, but we have to understand also the Orientalist gaze or the Orientalist dimension in this relationship. So on the one hand, this land has a history. This land has a human landscape and a physical landscape, and to be able to reincarnate the new Jew. What is it? What they called about? They talked about the idea of the new Jew, the reincarnation of the new Jew, to sever it or disconnect it from the diasporic Jew. The diasporic Jew is the wandering Jew, the Jew who lacks sorts of belonging. He is not part and parcel of the community in which they live. They wanted to introduce a new Jew, the new Hebrew, the one who seeks belonging in the Ottoman Palestine. So these teachings, fall in what I call the indigenization. So that helps the Jewish settlers or who came or who consume this knowledge about the land from abroad about how to indigenize themselves. The Palestinian people who back then they were they resembled the patriarchs, basically. So they looked at them and say, yay, Abraham looked like this, Isaac looked like that, Jacob did just like this. And if we want to be like Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, we have to deal the same way. We have to behave the same way. We have to adopt the same lifestyle. We eat pita. Let's eat bread and hummus. The Palestinians were doing this. Hey, look at the headscarf. Why did they put headscarf? Is that because of the sun, or maybe our patriarch had the same thing also? So they adopted this lifestyle too about the headscarf, and there are some pictures that show early Jewish settlers adopting the kufiya. That is today, people may be uncomfortable with the idea of kufiya on campuses, but the early Jewish settlers embraced the kufiya, embraced the lifestyle, and even the garb. Some of them even had the garb and had the sword. They want to go native. So this is like a one aspect of it. Another dimension of it is that not fetishization, but let's say they are frozen in time and they need to be educated, they need to be civilized, they need help. And this, like the group I mentioned earlier, is called the Bilawim, which is an abbreviation of a biblical verse from Genesis, Bet Yaakov Lecho Nelecha, so the house of Jacob, let's go and let's go. So they, in their program, when they drafted the program in Istanbul on their way to Palestine on the board of a ship, they said that we have come to extend a hand of help to our brother Ishmael. So they portrayed themselves as the descendants of Isaac, is a brother of Ishmael, and Ishmael is in need for help. Ishmael didn't ask for help, but they thought that by coming as settlers, they would like elevate the economic and status of the country. They would help the backward and primitive Palestinians who still are important for us to reincarnate the new Jew, but they still need to be civilized and to be educated.
I mean, that also reminds me earlier, John Smith had been involved with the Jamestown colony, and the seal of the Jamestown colony has a picture of a Native American that says, "Come over and help us." I'm wondering, though, as we're kind of thinking here toward the end of the first half of your book, we're in this kind of period of rising nationalism, I think. And when historians and other scholars talk about the rise of nationalism, we often think about the role of print culture. So I'm wondering, where were these Jewish intellectuals in Palestine, or how are they disseminating their work, and in what places was their work being disseminated and read?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So I would say that they disseminated, first of all, so many of these works fall in the category of what is called Idiat Haaretz, which means knowing the land, the knowledge of the land. And the word, the term itself, Yidi'ah, comes from, it's biblical, from the Bible, Yada. When you open like Breshit or Genesis, in the Genesis, there is a verse that says that Adam yada et Hava. So, what do you mean by what do you mean by Adam knew Eve? Like, had intimate relationship. So, in their perspective, the knowledge of the land is not to have a distant knowledge of the land, but to have an intimate knowledge of the land. So, like something intimate, something personal, something close. To be able to, integrate in the land itself. So this genre of called Yidiat Haaretz, knowledge of the land, inspired many of the writings of these scholars fall into the category of Yidiat Haaretz. They disseminated this knowledge through a number of venues. One, which is very popular, is journals and newspapers. So the newspapers and journals were more popular than books back then in the late 19th century because of the lack of publishing houses. Hebrew publishing houses in late Ottoman Palestine was quite scarce. Maybe there were a few Hebrew publishing houses. There was one in Jaffa that was established in 1890s, but didn't live long, and it was discontinued. And the case was the same, by the way, for also Muslims and Christian communities, because of the rule of the Ottoman Sultan Abdulhamid II was quite like strict in terms of the dissemination of knowledge because of the fear of European encroachment. So the dissemination of the printed word was quite limited because of censorship during the time of Abdulhamid II. The Hebrew publishing houses got a boost after the immigration, the second wave of Aliyah, the second wave of immigration from 1904 to 1914. By then, Hebrew printing houses or publishing houses increased noticeably, with Hebrew in the British Empire introduced as an official language. In the British period. Hebrew became an official language along with English and Arabic, which stayed the same during the first years of the State of Israel from 1948. So we say about the journals and newspapers that were mostly published abroad. They were published mostly in Odessa in Ukraine and in Warsaw in Poland, Polin. And also, in addition to the books, so that these books and articles in newspapers were published abroad, and they were brought to Palestine first for consumption to the Hebrew reading audience in Eastern Europe, generally speaking, and also for the nucleus of the Hebrew community that was establishing itself and striking its roots in Palestine at the time. So they would, get the copies of the books and journals and read about them. During the during the World War I, they suffered greatly because of the boycott, because the Ottomans banned any exportation of newspapers and books from abroad. In addition to the books and the newspapers, they were teachers. Many of these individuals were educators. So they interacted with their audiences in schools, in even like in colonies, yeshivot, moshavot, and also in yeshivot, like schools and colonies. They would interact with them and teach them about these ideas of knowledge, the knowledge of the land, which includes not only the physical landscape, but also the human landscape. Someone like Eliyahu Sapir, mentioned earlier, and David Yalin, they both were educators, and they taught their a different group ages, communities, like high schoolers, and also like grown-up people about the history of the land and its people. In addition to that, there were some efforts of founding public libraries, public and communal and private libraries. Someone like David Yadin, who I mentioned earlier, tried to help or establish the first public library, and also in 1917 he was trying to do more.
Great.
So, can I interrupt for a sec?
Absolutely.
Because you've given us a really complex portrait of a lot of different things going on at the same time. And I'm wondering if maybe people have some questions that this has generated. I mean, you've taken us back over a century, basically, to Palestine when it was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the roles that Jews and Muslims and Arabs interacted there. And so I'm wondering if we could open it up for some questions to folks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I'm curious about the fiction literature developed by both Jewish and Arabs in the late 19th century, earlier 20th centuries, where there's cross-pollination in various areas. Did it reflect itself in literatures? And I don't know if it's your area of study, but if you have some examples of people that wrote Hebrew that were influenced by the Arab culture, and vice versa, the people that wrote in Arabic, where they incorporated some of these new arrived Jewish ideas into their literature.
Yes, that's an excellent question. Yeah, indeed, there is, of course, a lot of, let's say, like both scholars who wrote in different languages, or in Arabic and Hebrew, they were in conversation with one another. So someone like Eliyahu Sapir, for example, in late 19th century, wrote an article about like on it's called, what is called, Sinata Yehudim, Jewish hatred. That was in late 19th century. And he was, in this article, he was surveying what is being said and talked about Jews in contemporary Arabic literature, fictional, non-fictional. He refers, for example, to medieval Arab works by Ibn Khaldun, the medieval sociologist Ibn Khaldun, in his work, The Introduction, where he talks about the Israelites and talks about Jews. And in 19th century, also contemporary Arab scholars were writing about the Jewish immigration to Palestine, and whether that immigration was motivated by colonial power to undermine the cohesion of the Ottoman Empire, or it was just like incoherent activity by a non-dangerous group of people who just like were seeking safe haven in Ottoman Empire. So he, in his conclusions, he talks about that the hatred is not ideological. So he was distinguishes between the Christian hatred of Jews versus the Muslim hatred of Jews. He says that the Christian hatred, and even like the Arab Christian hatred of Jews at the time, he claims to be ideological because of, Jews were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, as many of you may know. But Muslims don't have these ideological teachings. The Quran doesn't teach them that Jews killed Jesus or killed Muhammad, and even in fact the Quran itself absolves Jews from killing Jesus. It's like a verse in the Quran that talks about this explicitly, that says that Jews didn't kill Jesus. So Jesus was not killed by Jews, didn't even like report him to the Roman authorities. In the Arabic literature, we see scholars talk about the Jews in different ways. One, they talk about the indigenous Jew. The Jew is the native Jew. The Jew is from here, either the Ottoman Jew or the Oriental Jew. So there is a distinction between both. The Ottoman Jew could refer to the Sfaradim, those like Spanish Jews who came to the Ottoman Empire in late 15th century, and they continued to live in the Ottoman Empire. And they talked about the Oriental Jews who used to live in the Orient, especially in Iraq or in Yemen, and they never been part of the geographical Iberian Peninsula landscape. So they would distinguish between them and the Jewish settler. So they talked about the Jewish settler with a number of ways. One with skepticism, and of course that varies based on the historical period in which they talked about him. Some talked about him as the pawn of the European colonial power. Because remember, back then, Europe was eyeing the Ottoman Empire. They were eyeing the destruction of the Ottoman Empire for quite some time. The Russians, they hate the Ottomans. The British wanted also to take the Ottomans. The French didn't like the Ottomans. They were using the local communities to intervene into the internal affairs of the Ottoman Empire. That goes back to the 16th century with the introduction of the capitulations. And the capitulations meant that foreigners could avoid local laws and to be governed only by the laws of their country of origins. So they talked about them in this way, that they are foreigners not because of their Jewishness per se, but because of their Europeanness, and because of them being part of a colonial project that would disempower Palestinians and take their country or land from them. Like for example, there is Yusuf Diyaddin al-Khalidi. Yusuf Diyaddin al-Khalidi, he was a mayor of Jerusalem in late 19th century, and he had a correspondence with Tudor Herzl, for example. He learned about political Zionism. Like Herzl's plan was to seek the support of colonial power, either whether Caesar, the German Kaiser, or who wanted to have the mountain in Kenya. So the German Kaiser, he thought that he could help him secure Palestine for the Jewish people, the desolate and the persecuted Jews of Europe. And he also sought that with Abdulhamid II himself. He wanted to, find a way of making Palestine a land for the Jewish people, but both objected. Yusuf Diyaddin al-Khalidi wrote a letter to Herzl through a French rabbi, I forgot his name. And in this letter, the letter was in French. In the letter, he tells Herzl that take your project somewhere else. We will not accept this here. The people, this country has its people, and they are connected to it, and so on and so forth. And you are welcome to stay as individuals. You can, which is in line with the Ottoman policy. The Ottomans did not restrict the immigration of Jews in the 19th century on one condition: they could live anywhere in the Ottoman Empire except for Palestine in concentrated numbers. So he wrote to him about this, advising him to take this project somewhere else. So and there is more of a, but not necessarily in Hebrew. So they did not read Hebrew and responded to it, except for maybe native Arabic-speaking Jews who related to some literature, Hebrew literature, Hebrew literary works.
Okay, yes, there's another question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two ideas separately or connected caught my attention. One, you talked about the difference between living and celebrating as being a point where more extremism emerged, and also Balfour Zionism. So I wondered, are these two connected? And how did they develop between, let's say, 1917 and the Holocaust? And what then drives it? Is the Holocaust the driver for further extremism? So those are the ideas that are connected.
Do you have any response to any of these?
Oh, I mean, I was thinking this is the moment, right, where we see the collapse of the kind of middle ground, the ecumenical frame. Balfour is certainly important to that, although I was thinking like the year before, Kemal Pasha, who's the local Ottoman commander, offers to sell the wall to a Jewish community in Jerusalem. But yeah, I mean, I think that question's right along these kind of lines, thinking maybe too about the way in which Yalin's kind of career after Balfour intersects with like Zaki Pasha to illustrate, I think, what you're asking about, right?
Yes. So living and celebrating, those are like, when it comes to in the British period, we see the crumbling of this ecumenical framework of living and celebrating the ecumenical framework, or the ecumenical kind of like life between both sides. And the British, if you were to go back to the Balfour Declaration, which actually very interesting, is he doesn't talk much about the Palestinian indigenous population. He gives land, he declares Palestine as a national homeland for the Jewish people, while acknowledging the rights of the indigenous population, and also discourage mass immigration of Jews to Palestine. That's in the Balfour Declaration. And if someone like remember, it's actually very ironic, like to see the British foreign minister when they declared, I think maybe like few weeks before the declaration of the Palestinian state, he quoted the same Balfour Declaration. He said the Balfour Declaration itself promises 2 states, not one. But when you go to the Balfour Declaration, is the wording very terse and is written in a way that could bear various interpretations. But at the time when it was known to everybody, the Palestinians were livid. Palestinian Arabs were very, very angry. How could you give our land to the Jewish people? And the Jews also were angry. The Zionists were angry with the Balfour Declaration. Why? Because it doesn't say Palestine is the national homeland for the Jewish people. It's just like it promises or pledges the establishment of a Jewish national home for the Jewish people. And the British actually during their rule over Palestine did not do a good job in amending the neighborly relationship between Jews and Arabs. In fact, they implemented the colonial rule of divide and rule. So they divided between them. They didn't embrace, for example, the idea of bilingualism. They encouraged division between Jews and Arabs. Here is your language. You learn Arabic, study Arabic in school, and you teach Hebrew at school. They did not encourage both people to interact with one another and learn each other's language. They were very much invested in the separation between both of them.
You talk about Ladino, and obviously that goes back to the Portuguese and Spanish Jews who were exiled. Today, people do genealogical research that are Christian people, and they find out they're actually Jewish. They're descended from the Marranos, the hidden Jews. Was that a factor there in terms of Christians still outwardly being Christian, hiddenly Jews, or did they come out and actually declare their Judaism?
Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure.
Inquisition?
Well, I don't know about it. So there were many paths that Jews took when they were faced with the choice of, convert or leave, right? Spain and Portugal. Well, Portugal, they weren't even given the choice. They just were told to convert. And the paths take Jews not just to the Ottoman Empire, but also north to Amsterdam, the Netherlands, which were part of Spain at that point, and then, of course, to the New World since 1492, right? And Columbus and all is happening. And so these Christians, new Christians, as they were often called, move into these other spaces. At various times in these other spaces, like in Amsterdam, once Amsterdam becomes separate from Spain, they become Jewish. And some of them go to settle in Brazil, what becomes Brazil. And then there's war, and the Netherlands loses, and these Jews, most of them go back to Amsterdam, but some of them come to New York. And that's how you get some of your first Jews in New York in 1654 on a ship right there. So that's one path. There's another path, though, that these new Christians take, and that is to go to Mexico, right? Because that's also where Spain went, or to Peru, or to other parts of the Americas. And in those families, often remnants of Jewishness, Jewish identity remains, right? You change the sheets on Friday, right? Or you light candles, or, little things that more recently in the 20th century have been discovered in terms of sort of deathbed confessions, where a person will explain to a child, actually we were, right, once Jewish. Now we're talking like a lot of generations at this point. some of those new Christians, I'm going to continue to call them new Christians, more recently, starting in the latter part of the 20th century, have decided to become Jews. And there's a movement more broadly that connects these Jews, especially in places like New Mexico and in some parts of South America, that allow these men and women and children to form communities which they share this previously hidden identity. Right? It's happened also in Portugal. There's a really interesting series of photographs that were taken by one of these Portuguese communities, secretly baking matzah and stuff. It's a complicated story, but by and large, the new Christians did not go particularly to the Ottoman Empire. Italy, yes, but not so far as to the Ottoman Empire. The Jews who went to the Ottoman Empire were still Jews and established communities there, and hence the Ladino. So Ladino moves as a language. It moves to North Africa, it moves to South America, it moves to the Ottoman Empire, and it moves to North America too. I think, okay, maybe one more. Okay.
Sir,
Two more questions.
you mentioned that after Zionism idea came to existence, some wealthy Europeans like Rothschild started buying land in Palestine to move Jewish people to settle. My question is, was it done in significant amount to give Israel enough land to be recognized, and as an argument against some threats from Iran to throw Israel into sea? So the question is, was purchased land big enough?
The land that Rothschild purchased for the Jews was big enough to include entire Palestine, Israel? Is that a question? Yes, the settlers, Jewish settlers bought lands.
No, Zionism.
Yes.
No, under Zionism movement,
Yes.
land was bought to settle Jewish people.
Yes.
Was it big enough? No, in considering existing Israel, to say this is absolutely lawful state, and
so not just Rothschild. Throughout the history, from the Jewish settlement in late Ottoman until 1948, the amount, so when with the UN resolution, partition resolution of 181, 1947, it granted the Jewish state 45% of the total, 45 of the total British Palestine territory, and 55% to Palestinian Arabs. How many percentage of this 45% was purchased by Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals? I think less than 15%. The amount of the territories purchased by the Jewish organizations and communities, Jewish National Fund, etc., and other institutions, didn't amount to 15-20%. But there are other ways of the acquisition of land, one of which, and which is that Israel relies on, is that UN, the recognition of the international community of Israel in 1947. But the Palestinians and Arab states refused to accept the UN partition plan, and they went to war, and they lost the 55%, and with the armistice line, I think they had only 20% rather than 55% of what they were given by the United Nations.
Last question. Yes?
I guess if I took away one thing really from the beginning was that it wasn't always chaos and war between the peoples. There was a lot more successful examples of cooperation. Now, I can think of so many thoughts about that. One, of course, when you talked about the Balfour Declaration, it gives you could think about what does originalism mean, and you can see how it can mean whatever you want, and it's not just here. But given that all these very specific details that come under the kind of general heading that there are a lot of successful examples of collaboration and economic and intellectual growth as a result. Are there any specific things in there that you think we could really focus on today as a basis for bringing back more of that, based on what you saw? Anything just to bring it to the present time? Anything to leave us with a little prospect there?
Yes, there is a lot of work to be done, but I can think of several things. I can think of one thing for now is that vengeance is satanic. Vengeance is not the solution. I think people should treat each other with more kindness, especially the resourceful. The Israelis are more resourceful in this regard, and I think there is a need to treat the Palestinians with more dignity and kindness, and to recognize the Palestinians' right of self-determination. The Palestinians don't just want to eat and be fed and be safe. They want to be recognized as a Palestinian, as a people. The idea of thinking of population transfer, it's not going to work anywhere. Sending Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt, they will not be welcomed because they are not of the land. The Palestinians in 1830s fought the Egyptians. They didn't allow the Egyptians to occupy them or to conquer them. They allowed the Egyptians to stay there for only 8 years, and then they pushed them away. In Gaza also, after 48, the Egyptians were in control of Gaza. From 1948 until 1967, Palestinians suffered greatly under the Egyptians. They hated them. They hated them being in control over them. The Egyptians now, that's one of the lessons that they learn from history, is that we cannot rule over the Palestinians. And they are staying away, not because of out of caprice or whim or their desire not to cooperate, but because they know they cannot control them. They need to rule themselves by themselves. And I'm reminded by the Bialik's poem of the City of Slaughter, which he composed after it was like Kishinev pogrom, or Kishinev 1905, right? 1905, 1906. He talks about the City of Slaughter, about the suffering. It was like 200 something poem, which, by the way, got translated into Arabic in 1960s by a Palestinian poet. His name is something Hussein. Well, not relatives, but his name is something Hussein, where he talks about, and the poem actually talks about, sometimes the victim becomes a slaughterer. So the slaughtered can become slaughterer, and the poem warns about this. And Bialik himself was big on the idea of that vengeance is satanic. seeking vengeance and the destruction and all of these negativity doesn't lead to anything. The past 2 years were very difficult on so many people, and one of the things that I used to do is like to turn on the Israeli TV every single day and watch what's going on. Let's talk about Palestinians as people in East Jerusalem, inside Israel, also the Palestinians, the West Bank and Gaza. Yeah, people are mourning and are grieving what happened. That should be also be recognized, that the loss of, which is also in the Talmud and even in the Quran, the loss of one soul is equivalent to the loss of mankind. That one of the things that we learn from the story of Cain and Abel in the Quran and in the Talmud is that the killing of one soul is horrible, let alone hundreds of people or thousands of people. So just like getting rid of the idea of vengeance, which is less humane and focus on our humanity. Thinking of this biblical verse that God created man in his own image. Like God created man in his own image. Why? He wanted everyone to be equal. He did not create some people after his image and other people after another animal or another bird. He created all men after his image, so that no one should compete with each other and say I'm better than you. According to Rashi, actually, the medieval Jewish commentator says that the verse refers to human equality, not to the superiority of one over another in terms of race and ethnicity or religion. I think the mutual recognition of suffering and dealing with kindness and the rights of the Palestinians for self-determination, especially as we know that the international community is coming to recognize their rights to declare a Palestinian state, and even like the British themselves said that actually the Balfour Declaration guarantees a Palestinian state. But nobody talks about Palestinian state among the Israeli officials, let alone the American officials these days. I think that should be an act of kindness and recognizing this historic right to Palestinians.
Thank you very much for a really interesting conversation.
So thank you all so very much for coming. Please, let's give our distinguished guests another round of applause. Dr. Hussein, Dr. Covey, Dr. Moore. Thank you all for coming. We have a lovely reception just on the other side of this wall, which you can access by going out that way and around, or simply out this door here, whichever works for you. Just a couple quick things I want to put in front of you. The last week of October, we also have a full week of events. On October 28th, we are thrilled to be partnering with our Office of Multicultural Affairs to bring Anton Troyer, who will offer Ojibwe wisdom on decolonizing our futures through truth, sovereignty, and student success. On the 29th, we're offering a tour of the West Michigan Hindu Temple. For those who have never been in Hindu spaces before, we invite you to join us. And then on Thursday, the 30th, we are partnering with Ali at Aquinas College to welcome Bishop Daniel Turley, who will be reflecting on his time in Peru with His Holiness Pope Leo, looking at the Pope's vision of missionary discipleship. So lots of interesting events coming up towards the end of the month here at Kaufman Institute. Information is at registration or on our website, interfaithunderstanding.org. Thank you so much for coming and have a wonderful evening.